Thank you so much to all of you for having me today. It is so wonderful to be a part of your campaign lab. So as Andrea said, my name is Leah Weintraub. I'm a senior behavioral designer at Ideas 42. And we're going to talk about what behavioral science is and how we can use it in a campaign environment. So I guess a good starting place for that is, what is behavioral science? Does anyone know? Is anyone familiar with it? You can just call things out. Yeah. Yes, outlining human behaviors and tendencies at a macro level. That is an amazing definition. So, behavioral science pulls from a few different disciplines, from psychology, from economics, from sociology, from neuroscience, to try to understand why humans do what we do, what informs our behavior. And we don't just want to understand why humans do what we do. We want to understand how we interact with the world around us, and maybe how the world is not super well designed to respond to human behavior. And, in doing this work, I've realized that our assumptions about people can be very, very wrong. So we're going to go through a presentation today that we learn about some of the kind of organized ways that humans behave in maybe irrational ways, and then how that can apply to campaigns. So I work at Ideas 42, which is an organization that applies behavioral science to solving social problems. So I have colleagues that do everything from trying to figure out how to stop sex trafficking in Albania to how to get people to take vaccines. I work on the civic engagement team, so my work is mostly focused on inspiring more people to participate civically. But the whole idea of Ideas 42 is that we can use behavioral science to improve social outcomes and inspire social change. All right, can someone call out what's happening here? What are the blocks doing? Yeah, they're taking steps, right? But wait, what's happening now? Ooh, we're going to have to go back to that slide. But can someone call out what the difference was between the striped background and the gray? Yeah, so when it's on a black and white background, they're taking steps. And then when you don't see that striped background, it looks like they're just moving in a solid line. So I like starting presentations with optical illusions because I think they help to show us how our brains work. And I'm going to call out 3 different lessons from this slide that I'm going to refer back to so many times in this presentation that you're going to be like, Leah, stop. But the first one is that our context matters. So when those 2 rectangles are on the striped background, it looks totally different to our eye than when they're on the solid gray background. So number 1, context matters. Number 2, our brains are really good at finding patterns and automatically trying to describe what's happening in the environment. So I'm going to say that our brain looks at that striped background and says like, those are stairs. What do we do on stairs? We take steps. And then when there's not that context, our brain shifts in its perception. But those associations happen automatically without our conscious awareness. And the third thing that I'm going to say is that it's really hard to change our brains, right? We can intellectually know that against the gray background, the rectangles are moving in a solid line, but then it goes right back to this striped background and we see steps. We can't train our brains to see it as a straight line, even though we know that it's actually not what's happening. Unless any of you trained your brains to see it that way. Did you? Did anyone succeed? No, I see some heads shaking. All right, so these are the big lessons that we're going to come back to during this presentation. So this is another slide that I love. What's happening here? Where are we and what are these people doing? Ooh, they're taking an escalator to work out. Wow. So, it's really easy to look at these people and be like, wow, they're really not interested in working out, are they? But we can think about this a little bit differently. We can think about this as a design problem. Like, why is there an escalator going up to a gym? Right? Like, if we're going to take the escalator, it probably shouldn't be at a gym. So, we're going to come back to this in a little bit after we look into how our brains work. So, this is a little bit simplified, but basically, we have two ways of thinking. You can call it system one and system two. System one is where we spend 95% of our mental energy, and it's unconscious, it's fast, it's on autopilot. It's like when you've driven the same route so many times that you're not even thinking and you're at your destination, you're like, how did I get here? And so, this can describe why we see the steps, right, on that first slide, or why we saw the rectangles moving in a more incremental fashion, because our brain is just making automatic associations without our intervention. And system two is effortful, it is slow, it is logical, it is reasoning. Honestly, this is where we think that we spend most of our time. We think that humans are reasoning through what's going on in the world, and weighing options and looking at data and making careful decisions. But in reality, we're only spending about 5% of our mental energy in the system two world. And so I think about this a lot in advocacy campaigns. I have a confession to make that I used to work at advocacy organizations doing communications and PR. And I had so many colleagues would come to me and they'd be like, we have this great data, Leah. This is great. We should use this to inspire our messaging. And I think a lot of us think that if we have the best message, if we have the best data, if we have the most rational argument, we'll win our campaigns. And unfortunately, that's not the case, because to get people to accept, especially new information at that higher level of reasoning, it's really an uphill battle to get there. And I should note that if you all have questions, shoot up your hands in the middle of the presentation. Please do stop me. I hope that this will be a conversation. All right, so now that we know about system one and system two, what is happening with our buddies at the gym? How can we describe why they're doing what they're doing? Autopilot? Yeah, they're on autopilot. They're like, maybe it's early in the morning and they're like, all right, just got to cross this off my to-do list. And they're not even thinking on their way to the gym. They're just going up the escalator. And so instead of saying like, oh, these lazy people who aren't really interested in working out, we can say their environment isn't designed for them to make the most optimal decision for themselves. And so this helps to show that our context helps to shape our decisions, and we can behave in predictable fashions in a suboptimal way. And so I'm going to keep on coming back to the design of our environment is super, super important. But, this goes against the way that we think about a lot of advocacy campaigns or campaign efforts. We think that we got to win hearts and minds. We got to win people's minds to our side. But what if what we actually want to do is we want to change the world? So maybe we start with changing the world and we get the hearts and minds on our side. So we can't rewire the way that people think. That's really hard. I would love to do it. If any of you find out a way to do so, please let me know. I'll be sticking around after. But it's a lot easier to think about how we change the world that people are operating within. So just to put a fine point on this, behavioral science explains how our brains interact with our context to create a behavior. And again, so much of why we do what we do or how our psychology performs is dependent on our context. It's dependent on our environment. All right, so we've gone through the little primer to behavioral science, and now we're going to talk about applying it. And this is kind of the secret sauce of our work at Ideas 42. We have this methodology called DDDTS because we love acronyms that are very difficult to say. So basically, the process is we start with defining the problem. And that is usually us trying to figure out what assumptions do we have about what's going on here, and how do we really distill down to what the problem is that we're trying to address. Then we go about trying to figure out what's going on in the context surrounding this problem. So that's our diagnose phase, where we're maybe doing focus groups, maybe we're doing interviews, maybe we're doing site visits and observing people in their context to identify what those bottlenecks are that are keeping people from doing the action that we want them to do, the action that we identified in our problem statement. Then we start thinking about design. We're like, okay, we figured out what the problem is. We figured out the barriers at play. How can we design the environment in a different way to inspire our desired action? Then we're big fans of testing, so we do a lot of tests to see if our designs actually work, if they are doing what we intend them to do. And then if we have something that works, we're like, how can we share this? How can we spread this? So unfortunately, in a 30-minute time window together today, we don't have time to go through all 5 steps, but I'm going to try to give you all a little preview into what DDDTS looks like and how you can think about applying it to the campaign that you're working on or to your work more broadly. So we are going to start with define, and there are some papers on your table. I hope you all have pens. There are a couple pencils. If you need something, maybe I have something in my bag, or the folks at FYI could help out. But we're going to start out with defining a problem statement. So I have the format on the screen here, which is we think about problem statements as people are doing X, and we want people to do Y. So an example of this is New Yorkers are driving their cars around the city. We want New Yorkers to use public transit. Or it could be, Governor Hochul is not voting on our climate bill. We want Governor Hochul to vote on our climate bill. There are different things that you can do. It could be people aren't showing up for their bail appointments. We want people to show up for their bail appointments. There are lots of different ways that you can think about this within the context of your work. But I'd love for us to take like a couple of minutes to write down what you think your problem statement was. And I'll circle around in case you all have any questions. How are you doing with your problem statement? Do you need help, or is it like hard in the context of your work?
We just have a little bit of a problem with us working. The people who work here and the client aren't here. Yeah. So we don't know. We're the only ones here right now.
Great.
Yeah.
And are also not
Isn't aware of sort of what team sport housing is or the problems related to it. So I guess we want them to know about it, right? So as one angle of taking, right?
Yeah, I think there's one thing that's part of it.
How are we feeling? Are we feeling like we have problem statements together? Raise a hand if you feel like you need one more minute. Cool. 1 more minute it is. All right. I think we're going to come back together. Does any brave soul want to share what their problem statement was? We sure can.
Okay, from our team's chat, we have youth give up on trying to address legal needs in their life. We want youth to use our free resources to use the law for power.
Cool. That's awesome. That's awesome. Anyone else feel like sharing? That's a, ooh, I see a hand up. I see it. Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Lower income residents are avoiding seeking health care. We want them to not fear doctors, take control of their health, and know what resources are available to them.
Awesome. That's amazing. How was this? Was it easy? Was it challenging? Pretty easy? Awesome. That's great. All right. So we have our problems. Ooh, are we good? We have our problem statements. And now, all right, we are back together now. There's definitely going to be more time to come together as a team. It's really energizing to see how excited you all are getting about defining a problem statement. I hope that this format can help. Yeah. Can it be, is it an action or a shift in opinion? I think the easiest way to do behavioral design is when it's around an actual action that they're carrying out. Opinions can be hard because it's about, changing people's minds in some ways. But I think that the tools at least can be helpful when thinking about okay, what could be barriers that are keeping people from having maybe the opinion that we want? So hopefully, the process will be helpful for opinion change, though that's not fully the focus. That's a great question. All right, so now we're going to go into diagnosis. Wow, this is the fastest DDD-TS process I have ever seen, but here we go. So we're going to learn a little bit about how we can spot things in the context that could be keeping people from doing our desired action. So what's going on in the context? And let's define what context is. I mean, we can think context can be such a big category, but for the sake of this conversation, I've broken down context into 6 different categories where humans behave in really actually predictable ways based on these 6 factors. So we're going to go through all 6 of them, and we're going to figure out ways that maybe can apply to your campaigns for maybe suboptimal actions or decision making. So we're going to start with time. So here's this fun little graph that shows time of day and the number of cancer screenings that primary care doctors order. And, you think about cancer screenings that doctors are thinking about pre-existing conditions, or they're thinking about family history. And that's the motivation that they're using to determine whether or not to give a patient a cancer screening. But some researchers went in and they were like, how does time of day affect it? And as you see from the chart on your screen, the number of cancer screenings goes down over the course of the day. And, there are a couple of reasons why this could happen. One is that at the beginning of their day, they're like, I'm made of time. I got everything. And then as the day goes on, they're like, oh, maybe I'm a little more rushed. And so they start thinking about the things that they can cut. It could also be that they have decision fatigue, that they're like, oh my God, I'm so sick of making all of these decisions for the patients. I don't want to have to make this other decision about whether or not I give a cancer screening, so I'm just not going to do it. There's this fun thing in this graph, which is, do you see that there's a bump at noon? And bump is like around lunchtime. So maybe the doctors had a little bit of a break and they were like, all right, I'm energized, ready to go again. So this graph helps to show that the time of day affects the decision making that we carry out, or why we do what we do. All right, we're going to go into social context now. And we have a fun little video that my friend Tom is going to play.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with the white shirt, the lady with the trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before.
Tom, I think we're good. All right, so y'all get the gist. I saw some of you like covering your eyes, like, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing that. So I guess what we can learn from this video of these dudes in the elevator, it's that we are social beings and we respond very powerfully to those around us, especially if we don't know what we're doing. So have you ever been in a context where you're like, I have no idea what's going on here. I'm just going to watch other people see what they're doing and I'm going to do that too. That is the power of social norms. And there are 2 types of social norms. There's descriptive norms and prescriptive norms and descriptive norms. And prescriptive is what we think that people do. And descriptive is what people actually do. And both of those are really powerful at shaping our behavior. So I'll give you an example on this next slide. Ooh, is my clicker not working because of the video now? There we go. All right. So this is an instance in which the framing of an issue uses social norms, maybe in a way that the people who wrote it did not intend. So this little infographic shows America has an obesity epidemic. Over a third of adults are obese. And I can imagine that the people who wrote this were like, wow, I'm going to flag that this is a huge problem and people are going to see this and they're going to say this is a problem. But this could backfire, right? Because what could happen is that someone looks at this and is like, oh, chill. Over a third of adults are obese. That means, and they're doing fine. So that means that maybe it's not so big of an issue. And there's another example that I like to give, which is, if there are news stories or articles about how few women sit on boards of companies, that could become a descriptive norm that's like, yeah, this is the way things are. Right. And so I like this example in the context of advocacy work and social change work, because we often have to think about how we present the problem that we're trying to solve in a way that inspires people to do something to address it. And instead of perhaps falling into the same patterns as existed before. All right, now we're going to go into choice set and presentation. Would you rather select one jam from 6 options or one from 24 options? Who is team? I would rather choose from 6. All right. Anyone would rather choose from 24? All right. The brave souls. I see the hands like, I shouldn't. Social norms. So a couple psychologists did an experiment in a grocery store where they had a little table set up. And for some of the, one of the days that they tabled, there were 6 jams, and another day there were 24 jams. And what they found is that when people were presented with 6 jams, they were 10 times more likely to buy a jam. And they were more likely to be satisfied with their decision of the jam that they chose. If people were selecting from 24 jams, they were much less likely to buy a jam. And if they did, they were like, ooh, I made the wrong decision. This pineapple jam shouldn't have gotten that one. So what happens when we have too many options, it's called choice overload, where we freeze and we're like, I don't know what to do here. I'm going to make the wrong decision. So the way that we present choices is really powerful. And there are so many different elements of how we present choices. But for the sake of this conversation today, I'm going to talk about choice overload, that we don't want to present people with too many options because that could backfire and lead them to not take any action at all. All right, now we're going to go into mood and affect. All right, so I'm going to take us to a restaurant now. And we tend to think in the United States that people people give tips based on how the service was, right? Like if you have stellar service, then maybe you give a higher tip. But some researchers found that we are really powerfully affected by our emotions with tipping. That if the person who is serving us wrote "thank you" on the bill, their tips go up by 2%. If they write something about nice weather on the bill, it goes up by 8%. And if they introduce themselves by name over the course of the conversation, tips are by 4%. So these statistics show me that the emotions that we inspire in one another, or the emotions that we feel, can affect our behavior. There's another statistic that voting declines when it's raining outside. And that could be because of the hassle of the rain, but it could also be because we're more sad when it's raining. So our emotions at the point of decision making are really powerful. And the tipping example is an interesting one because it shows how we can inspire emotions in others to lead to I guess better outcomes, perhaps in the context of tipping. So that's affect. Now we are back on stairs. And Tom, I'm going to ask you to hit play. I think this one should be easier. Yeah, there we go. Tom, I think we're good. So, yeah, I know, lovely music. But this is a really fun example of how they changed the context, right? They used novelty and a fun, kind of playful installation to make taking the stairs more salient for people. So they have to pause, look at the stairs, they're like, what's going on there? Instead of doing their automatic action of going to the escalator, it inspires a pause and makes them change their behavior. So I really like that because I think it's a great example of design, that we can come up with these imaginative designs or ideas about how to get people out of their routinized behavior and make a different decision. So last context feature that I'm going to talk about is scarcity. Oops, I'm revealing myself too soon. So can you all call out things that are scarce? Water. Water is scarce. That's a really good one. Huh? Clean water, yeah. Money, time, housing. Doesn't have to be. But yeah, those are great ones. So we got money. We got time. I'm also going to add cognitive bandwidth. So that's something fun that behavioral science introduces into a conversation about scarcity, which is our ability to make decisions and our attention are limited. And so having scarce mental energy and bandwidth has a huge reverberating impact on how we go about our lives. So cognitive bandwidth allows us to solve hard problems, to focus our attention and to control our impulses. But when it's depleted, maybe we're too anchored on the present moment and we're not thinking about the future, or we become impulsive, or forgetful, or distracted. And so for many of us and many of the people that we work with or the communities that we serve, scarcity of one of these or many of these resources is at play. And so it's really helpful to understand how it operates. So I like to think about packing suitcases when I talk about scarcity. So an example is like when you're packing a suitcase, because you're focusing your energy on getting that suitcase together, you're not thinking about how you're going to get to the airport. And you're so like zoomed in on it. And so maybe by the time you're done packing the suitcase, you're like, I have no idea how to get to the airport. You see, it will take an hour and a half because of traffic on the BQE. And you're like, well, that's not happening, right? And so when we focus our energy on one thing, we're not thinking about other things, and those other things could potentially suffer as a result. So the scarcity that we experience in one area really reinforces scarcity in other areas. It's like if you're packing carry-on, which I do because I'm a cheapskate and I don't want to have to pay $75 to check a bag. So I'm like, I will fit my 6 weeks of travel into this tiny suitcase. And my family makes fun of me because I always forget something, literally always forget something. I have to buy something, borrow something, like literally forgot a sweatshirt when I was traveling to like sub 50 degree weather environment. Like why? But that was because I was trying to fit a ton into a tiny space. And so inevitably I'm going to forget things or leave things out. Whereas if I had a big suitcase, I wouldn't be pressed about everything that I was putting in it because I'd be like, all right, chill, there's enough space. So scarcity creates more scarcity. If we have scarce space, then we have scarce mental bandwidth to deal with that scarce space because we're focusing so much on it, we're forgetting things outside of it. So scarcity has a huge impact on how we go about our lives. All right, so those are 6 context categories. And now we're going to think about how those categories impact your problem statement. And you're looking at me like I don't have that much time. Is that right? How much we got? All right. So I'm going to at least introduce this, and then maybe this is something that you pick up over lunch. Maybe it's something that you think about later. But the exercise that I would love for us to do is to think about if those 6 categories are at play when you're thinking about your problem statement. So it might not be all 6 of them. It might just be 1 or 2. But, to go back to the problem statement that I created earlier about people not taking public transit, maybe the physical environment is at play because there aren't connective buses to bring people to the subway to be able to get where they need to go. So they have a sense that the where they're located doesn't connect to the physical services that they would otherwise take. So let's take however much time we have left to think about how these context factors affect your problem statement. And then in the future, I really, really recommend you thinking about, like, let's dream up ways that we can do this differently. Because I think that that's where the fun part happens. That's when we start to see breakthroughs in the work that we're doing. So why don't you all take some time, start thinking about how these context factors impact your problem statement. I'm going to go back to that page so you have them up. Cool. Thank you.
All right, we're going to spend some time working on what Leah just assigned to the group, and then I'll come back up in a second to say some more things. But let's focus on this problem statement for a little bit. Thank you, Leah. Round of applause.
Cutting the page, things are looking up. That time is out of my range. One drink's what led to the change. Out on my own, kicked out of the show. I'll take what's mine and I'll go. It's just like all brothers used to say. There's something wrong with this world. I feel it coming on, and contradictions take their toll. 'Cause I know we went wrong, and something struck me. It struck me deep. It brought me to my knees. Body step on back from me. So Melanie made another home here. We'll put together the
Hey everyone, I'm gonna call your attention back. It's cool. You are having awesome conversations. I really hope that you continue with them. Any questions or reflections before you continue to dive into this or dive into your other work? Anything that's coming to mind?
I'll ask a question. I think from what I've seen from a lot of the teams, it's really hard to narrow in your problem statement because it feels like there's so many issues that are all hyper related.
Totally.
And I think that ties into context, but how do you narrow in on your problem statement and figure out what's our primary focus here? And I know that's a really hard question, but if any table wants to give an example that they're struggling, feel free.
Yeah, that's an awesome question and something that my colleagues deal with all the time. Like I was on a call this week and the team was trying to figure out like, okay, we have this broad problem statement or we have the narrow one. Which one do we do? And they were like, well, our partner would want us to go with the broad one. They're dealing with people who are dropping out of a GED program. And they were like, we could focus on this tiny step between admittance to the program and between application and admittance, or we can focus on the whole spectrum until they go to their first class. And they ultimately chose the smaller one because they were like, we can understand this better. So there's not an art, like it's more of an art than a science. You decide what you think that you can work on. Cool. Well, I don't want to interrupt you too much. I just want to thank you all so much for your time. I'm going to be circulating around, so if you have questions as you continue in your work session, I will be here. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right, let's continue working and we'll be floating. So let us know if you have any questions. Good luck.